good on that, and we should be live.
Great.
I'll give it a sec just in case.
Mhm.
You're monitoring the chat, right?
I am. People are talking about burgers and where they're from.
Cool.
Oh, they can see us.
Oh, great.
Hey, everyone.
Hey,
Thanks for
everybody.
coming.
Thanks for joining. This is really weird. I'm used to doing video conferences where I can see everybody else, but this time it's just you looking at me in my dining room. Weird times. So I'm Nate. I'll do a little bit of an introduction before we get going. I used to work at National Instruments from 2013 to 2017, then moved out to San Diego to work at one of the alliance partners here. And now I'm working at Philips Respironics, which is a company that manufactures ventilators. So I have had a pretty crazy week. Um, I've been using LabVIEW since I started working at NI, so about 7 years now. And I've been using the SMO framework um, for maybe a little over 2 years now. So I have some pretty good experience building large applications, small applications, kind of everything in between. Mike, you want to give your introduction to yourself?
Sure. So thanks, everyone, for coming. My name is Mike Lay. Along with Ivan Gagne, I help organize and run the San Diego user groups for LabVIEW. Today, Nate is presenting. But a little bit about myself. I've been using LabVIEW since 2006. I also used to work for Philips Respironics, and I also used to work for one of the alliance partners here in San Diego, Scythe Systems. I now work at Dexcom, but throughout I've been just working on LabVIEW. I've had my CLA for 6 or 7 years now, and I actually have never used JKI SMOs. I mainly use active framework. So for me, I'm pretty excited to see this presentation. I'm going to try to act as kind of an intermediary for the audience. We thought about different ways of doing this, and we think the chat format is probably the easiest. I'll try to read questions from the chat as well as pipe up anytime I have questions about what Nate is doing. Quick note, there is like a 10 to 15 second delay between you guys seeing and hearing what we're saying. And so just kind of put up with us. This is our first time trying this out, but hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I guess that's one other thing to note. I've been CLA certified for maybe, has it been a year yet? It's been close to a year. If it hasn't been 1 year, it's been close to a year.
I don't know why you would think I would know the answer to that.
I don't know. That was mostly thinking out loud. All right, well, let's get our big heads out of the way and switch over to some LabVIEW. All right, so what I have today is a small demonstration application that I'm going to hopefully build out some more features and extend some of the functionality using state machine objects. So what I have is a application that's called exeman, like a little manager for some executables you've got. The idea being if you're managing the several computers, like let's say in an engineering lab, and you want to make sure that they all have the same version of some application on it. You could use a tool
I
like
made someone in chat asked if you could turn your mic up, or I don't know, speak louder. I'm not sure.
I can probably turn my mic up. No. Does everyone have a problem with my mic, or is it just that one person?
How's the volume, guys? I guess try to speak a little louder, and we'll just keep going.
Okay, I'll like tilt the thing really close to my mouth.
There we go.
How's that? I can't do much better than that. So if that's not good enough, sorry.
We'll do our best. If you can't turn up the mic, turn up the. Oh, I'm just too loud. That's a problem.
Oh, I can turn you
lower,
down.
Yeah, turn me down. That'll be good.
Here, we'll drop you. How about that?
Oh no, now no one can hear me. That's fine. This is good.
No, you're still in the okay. Right. So that is the idea behind what this application does. The code behind it is just a JKI State machine. From our very official polling that we did before starting this presentation, it seems like most of you are familiar with the JKI State Machine, but maybe not the State Machine Objects framework. So I thought that building out this application using a JKI State Machine would be a good place for everyone to start. Some explanation as to the classes that I've got here. I have this application class, which is representing the data that you'd see in one row of this table. And then I have this application storage class, which represents all of the applications that would be managed. And then there's just some helper functions to format the storage into this list box here. So if I run it, you'll see there's not much going on. You can select an executable for the thing to manage. So let's pick this one. Great. And let's pick maybe one more. Oh, that was lucky.
You mean totally planned, right?
Something like that. I haven't implemented delete yet, so that's fine. The actual functionality of this application isn't really all that important. That's not why we're here today. So let's start by adding a splash screen to this application. Splash screens are something that kind of make your application look a little bit more real or legitimate, maybe. I don't know. So the first SMO that I'm going to show is a reuse library called Splashy. This is one of the first SMOs that we made to share internally with our tools team. So this splash screen shows up on all the tools that we have now, and provides a nice way of like, I don't know, just adding some uniformity. It has a little image icon here for you to fill in with your own application image, and then it's got some texts here for maybe the tool name, some other information about it, and then it's got another text box down here for you to put in the current status, like what's loading, things like that. So if we look at the code for this state machine object, the heart of it is this state machine, and anyone who's used the regular state machines, this will be really familiar. It does have some additional code in it. For example, getting a reference to the actual object that's running. That's what this is doing here. So it enables you to work on the actual object you're using throughout the rest of your state machine. Inside your event structure, you've also got a couple of pre-built events for handling startup and shutdown. And this is where I'm going to make my first big endorsement for state machine objects compared to Actor. State machine objects stay running as long as the, I believe it's as long as the VI that launched it stays in memory. Not like with Actor, where once you launch an Actor, it runs forever until you tell it to stop. One of the big complaints that I know people have with Actor Framework is that it's sometimes really easy to lose track of whatever running actors you have, especially if your application is dynamically creating them. With state machine objects, if your application crashes, specifically in the development environment, you can pretty much be sure that the state machine objects are going to close down on their own and free up, that resource. So that's a big plus.
I kind of like that actors are independent of the thread that launches them.
I knew you were going to say
I kind of think
like
of that as a benefit. But I see your point about like not being sure what actors are running. That's tricky to figure out when you're first getting into the framework, for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. What else do I want to show about this? So the way that you interact with a state machine object is through events, unlike actors where you interact with them through the enqueuer. So state machine objects have a concept that more or less holds water: public, protected, and private events, with the idea being that, and this is always hard for me to remember, protected events are events in data going into the process. That's what this VI is called, process.vi. So protected events go into the process. public events come out of the process. So this way here, a client of a state machine object could subscribe to its public events and interact with it through an API that calls protected events. Does that sound right, Mike? Did I?
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like an API versus stuff that's internal to the class.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some API functions here. I'll show you the send to splash message. All it's doing is taking your state machine object, getting a reference to the user event, and then generating data on it.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the state machine object here as it's registered for that event, gets that data, and then does whatever it needs to do with it. Let's see, where does that event get created? In this function here. So state machine objects also provides a really extensive set of framework methods and callbacks, I'll say. So if you want, I have this open in a bunch of different projects, so I can't really show you what the overrides are. But if you look at the state machine objects themselves, you see that you've got all of these different callbacks that you can override. And that's really handy. So if you want to add some code when your state machine object starts, you can put it in the onStart VI. On stop, process stop, stopped, destroy, and destroyed. So you have a lot of extra hooks for where you can put some code in that you want to run at various points in the life cycle of the state machine object. And I think that's another big advantage over Actor. Are there any callback spots or things like that in Actor, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, there's pre-launch init, there's handle last act. This is much more granular, which I kind of think you could. I kind of like how, I'm biased, but Actor has a smaller number of hooks, but you can choose whether to, because it's an override and you're calling the parent method, like there's onDestroy and onDestroyed here, but with Actor framework it would be more like stop core override, and then you can choose to put the code before or after the parent method call.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Instead of having, so this is very granular as far as this.
It is.
It's got a different ways of skinning the cat.
Yeah. Let's see. I
yeah.
was trying to see where that code actually gets called, but for some reason I cannot. We can start digging through this API, but that's going to get really messy. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, let's not.
We'll just minimize all those and come back to our little.
I was going to ask really quick. I noticed that the immediate parent of Splashy is SMO UI. Is that something that comes out of the box with the framework, or is that something you made?
No, that comes out of the box. Let's
Okay.
see. So maybe I should have started here.
Maybe.
How to make a state machine object. So included in the state machine objects, how to install state machine objects. Maybe I should have started way at the beginning. You get this through Package Manager. That's all I'll say. You know how to search.
Yeah, that sounds simple enough.
Yeah. There's some templates that are also in the Package Manager. There's like a DACMX template, a graphs template.
I can't help but notice that this is taking a while to load.
Yeah. Jim, if you're watching, this is my number one complaint.
Is this just the first time you call it?
No. This little tool
really
takes this long every time. It's using a lot of VI scripting in the background to dynamically figure out which of your classes are state machine objects, and I don't really know why it takes this long. But I think
is anyone from JKI in the chat? I just because I know a few JKI people like RSVP, and I don't know if they actually showed up.
Okay. Well,
okay.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have opened this. Can I continue? I can continue doing stuff. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Let's just. There we go. All right.
Yeah. See, like it. Oh, and because I have a bunch of projects opened, it pulled up the same thing in a few different places. That's weird.
All right. Francois says there's a newer version that is probably better, but
okay. Hopefully this isn't the newer version, because I am up to date. All right. Let's stay on topic. So this is how you make a state machine object. You have this little editor here. You can pick what folder you want, and then you have your list of templates. Like I was saying, these templates, I think these top 4 here come from the core just SMO library that you get. And then you can download the UI templates. Mostly what I use are the UI ones because I never know if I want a state machine object to ever be a user interface. Um,
Hmm.
and it's nice to just have that all the functionality in place. So there's no reason really
Wait
not.
a second, Nate. You told me that you've been planning ahead with your classes a lot better recently. Now you're saying you don't know if you want a UI before you start the class up?
Yep. So another one, I use the byref with events, and I also use this UI underscore embed. For a while, I was tricked by this UI underscore embed because it doesn't actually inherit from the SMO.UI. That's why they put the little
Hmm.
underscore there. It's real tricky. I don't know why they did that. You can easily embed
Ah,
the byref with events, and I actually have been doing that in some of my other projects. So this is
yeah.
the one that I make. I like using SMOs by reference.
Hmm.
Just it just it makes keeping track of them way easier. The only one that I haven't done by reference is the splash screen because I don't really store any data in it. It's not doing a lot of processing. So I think the splash screen is just this SMO UI basic here. And
Okay.
the difference with that is the data itself is in the class rather than in a DVR.
Ah,
So
gotcha.
it's just a little
Yeah.
easier to access your events and everything like that.
Right.
I think
When you make it by reference, then do you have to make a lot of DVR wrappers, or is there like a scripting tool that assists you with that
there's
overhead?
there's template code, but there I think there is scripting. I've never used it. And that little editor that I just closed, I'm not opening it again. In that little
Yeah, let's
editor,
not open that again.
in that little editor, they do have a button that's called create events or create message or something like
Hmm.
that. I've never used it
Hmm.
because I don't like their DVR template. This is
Wait, so
unnecessary.
you do all your message creation by kind of manually then?
Oh, yeah, I know it's the worst.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So the actor does have
I,
message maker from MGI, which probably does help a lot in terms of.
it's basically built. It's built into LabVIEW,
Oh, it is?
just the basic IDE. Yeah, MGI was nicer for a while, but I think since like if you're using the latest version of LabVIEW, it does like 98% of what MGI Maker did.
All right,
So
cool.
yeah.
Um, Making messages in SMO is a lot easier than actor, though. I'll say
Hmm.
that because it's just a user event. So you get a handle on the event
Gotcha.
reference
Yeah.
and you just put data in it. So I think it might be a little bit more manual, but I think it's not as much work as it might seem coming from actor. Um, okay, so let's get that splash screen added to our tool. That's going to require us to make a launcher VI. Then that launcher VI will launch the splash screen, and it'll also show our main VI here. So I'll make a new VI, and I need to get my splashy on. Let's see. How do I do that? So a lot of the functions for starting and stopping SMOs come from their parent class. So you get pretty familiar with where all the functions are. Um, as far as creation and a lot of lifecycle management functions are just in the base SMO class. So we're going to create the SMO and we're going to have to start it. And I'll just provide the splashy constant here as the SMO that I actually want to start.
Cool.
So that's enough to get the splash screen running. By default, it's not shown though. So it can be running in the background. So what I want to do is I actually want to, oh, I have this little helper via here, create and show splash screen. Look at that. Get out of here, template code. So here's what I'm doing, what I just deleted. Um, the splashy constant create start, and then I'm sending it a message, which is a path just to an icon. Um, and then just some, what else am I doing? Showing it. So this show VI comes from the SMO UI parent class. So that's one benefit of extending the UI class. You get these show and high methods for free. Um,
Right.
and this is actually event driven, the show and hide. The SMO itself is um, showing and hiding itself rather than that being handled externally.
Right.
So we're going to create and show the splash screen, and then we're going to call main. And what I want actually is I want main to have a handle on that splash screen so that once we actually get main running, we can hide the splash screen. So I'm going to have.
A couple comments from chat. Nick wants you to move the context help down a little bit so that our faces aren't blocking it. And then Casey would like to see the inheritance of Splashy,
Sure.
like the class inheritance.
Yep, we can do that. Dependencies. Where is it? Why isn't
It's your project.
I know. Oh, I already added it here. That's why. Okay. This hopefully shouldn't take too long.
If it does, it's NI's fault, not
Here we go.
JKI's
Oh,
fault.
I've got 4 projects. Maybe I shouldn't have 4 projects open. I have all the SMOs I want here. So here's our inheritance chain. We've got Splashy, SMO UI, the SMO base class, which just is a LabVIEW object. So a pretty simple inheritance chain.
Cool.
Right. So back here. Here's a really cool tool. Hopefully you can't hear my cat. He's howling at the door behind me.
We definitely can.
Oh, awesome. So if you haven't downloaded this yet and you work in LabVIEW front panels, you need to download it. It's a small utility that comes from Package Manager called Pain Relief. I can't remember which company or which developer actually created it, but incredibly handy for doing things like turning scroll bars on and off. Is this really not going to work right now? I've literally
Probably.
been using it all day long. Oh, of course not. You've got to be kidding me. All right, well, the scroll bar is not showing, but it's letting me scroll, so that's all I really care about. I want to add a splashy as an input here. I'll come back here. All right. Now my main VI is going to close the splash screen once it itself has opened. So right before we call this front panel state open, or maybe right after it, we're just going to say close the splash screen. And that should hide it. I'm not going to wire my errors because I'm a monster. All right, so let's go and test this out. Fingers crossed here. This is risky business. Never programmed live before.
I mean, you're CLA, so all your code works the very first time. That's what being a CLA means, right?
Yeah. Yep. That's about right. Let's stick it here. Saving it just in case LabVIEW crashes, which who knows. All right. Great. So my main launched. Where was the splash screen? I wasn't actually showing any messages or putting any delays in, so it was probably just opening and then closing way too quickly. So let's send a splash message, and maybe let's do a little wait here. Have you used this stall dataflow VI before?
I don't know what this is.
It's a malleable
like
VI. It allows you to put a time delay on any wire, basically.
And
it's just input
gotcha.
output. So you put whatever you want in, and it just does this wait. It was included, I think, in
Smart.
2018 or 2019. Yeah, so I could have put it on this one too.
Yeah, I don't trust any. I don't know if any NI people are in the chat, but I don't trust new NI features for at least one full version, not just like an SP1, but like one full year before I toss them in anywhere. And I think you were telling me that malleable VIs have broken some of your builds. I really want to avoid that.
Yeah.
If I can.
Yeah, that was a lot of nested malleable VIs though.
You're always doing some sketchy stuff, Nate.
I'm an early adopter. That's how I preferred. All right, so here's my message. This is my splash screen. Um, let's go again. There we go. This is my splash screen, and once the main UI opened, we're all set. Any questions? What else should we do with the splash screen? I think that's about it. It's pretty basic. Kind of exhausted it, right?
Yeah, if people have questions in the chat, feel free to ask. I think people have been asking a few questions here and there, and I've been trying to answer, but yeah, feel free to participate a little more. I know the lag makes it weird, but don't be shy.
All right, the next one I want to show is this async logger. This was the first really big reusable library that we made. The problem that we were trying to solve is we didn't want to have each individual application we were building implement its own log file management. We wanted to have that centralized through a library. We wanted to have that asynchronous. We didn't want to have to worry about where to save log file paths. We didn't want to just keep having to worry about that problem over and over and over. And I wanted to roll my own logger. I know that there's plenty of logging libraries built into VI Package Manager. I know that probably every single person has their own logging library. So here's mine. This is another SMO. I think it extends the UI. It does. And here's an example where I've got a state machine object that has a UI that you can have open if you want to see the active entries in your log file, or you can just have it closed and never open it and just let it worry about logging data to a file. So I won't show the code yet. First, I will add some logging into main. So maybe let's just log all of our states. That seems reasonable, right?
Sorry, I started like answering questions in chat.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by using this one, which is just the basic log message. The idea behind the logger is that the logger logs messages, where the base message object just contains some text, but you could extend that and make like an error message, where all you have to do is implement this toString function, and then whatever data your message contains, as long as you can format it into a string one way or another, the logger is going to call this and write this to a file. So this is pretty handy for us logging messages within various parts of our application. It makes it good if like something crashes, or if maybe your error handling isn't fully developed yet, I'll phrase it that way, and you can't get error messages to display, or maybe you're troubleshooting why you can't get error messages to display. This is also maybe sometimes easier than doing putting a probe in place or doing highlight execution, because if you're trying to troubleshoot like a race condition, sometimes highlight execution actually solves your problem and you can't debug it anymore. Definitely been in that situation.
Does error message inherit from loggable message?
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of like, it's almost like actor framework in a way. Interesting.
How so?
Message classes, like a separate message class.
Oh, I see. Okay, so with the actor, the message kind of represents like an action or a thing to do. In the logger, the message represents a thing to log. So let's obtain a logger, and then we'll just log some messages. Let's see. I don't care about that. It's hard to not care about these things. Okay, we're gonna leave it unnamed. This way here.
There's only 100 people judging you right now as you code. So.
Oh, that's fine. Let them judge. Let them judge. By default, it's going to log the file into public documents. I wanted to pick a location, like a default location, where it would always have write access to. In public documents, you always do. I didn't want to put it in like alongside the executable, because sometimes you might not have
program
write access
files
there.
Is like locked off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's bitten me a few times as well.
100%. Okay, so let's just run it and see. I'm going to take some time off of the splash screens here. Let's let it only go for 1 second. And we will run our launcher. Splash screen. All right, I should probably just hide.
Nate, Matt asked if the logger messages follow the same command pattern that Active Framework does, and you said earlier that it doesn't really represent an action; it represents just an item that gets logged.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the actual business logic is up into the logger, and the logger messages are just conditioning it so that the logger can handle it. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I'll show
Okay.
the details of what the actual SMO is doing, but I wanted to show
The
what
behavior,
what
the
the
actual.
behavior is first, so we have
Okay.
some context.
Sure.
So here I always have my public documents folder open because this is where all of my log files go. So here we've got oh, yeah, these are all the event structures. That's helpful. Um, was I logging the argument? I was logging the argument. Let me go back and log the actual state.
Oh yeah, that might be good.
Yep, that's what I was doing. There we go. Actually, let's.
Concatenate. There we go.
That's fine. I'm going to have a bunch of empty hyphens at the end of this, but not putting this up for code review. All right, there we go. So now we're running it, and let's look at our log file. There we go. So we've got our states out here. Um,
Oh, so you recreate, you like overwrite existing log files. You
yeah, by
don't
default,
append.
that's what it's going to do.
Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
You have the option of specifying what um, log file path you want at runtime. So if
Hmm.
you wanted to preserve logs, you definitely could by specifying or like appending a timestamp. I mostly only care about this like
One session
in
at a
situ.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Interesting.
So let's see.
Why are you getting so many blanks without a state or an argument? What's going on there?
That's probably my move. Every time I move it,
Well,
it's an event.
shouldn't the move also have a state associated
It's
with it?
just the event structure. So my event structure has this JKI State Machine.
Oh, it's
Then
idle. It's like the
it
default. Okay.
enqueues an empty string, and that tells it to go into the event structure. So we got
Mm,
this empty string here.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's kind of a quirk if you're using it to log states.
Yeah.
Logging states is, I mean, generally going to be really noisy, especially if you're doing a lot. But
Right.
this is just an
Right.
example of what you can do with the logger. Um,
Got it. Yeah. Yeah.
so let's actually go into the logger. Oh, my cat is sitting on top of my lap now. Let me just make sure I don't strangle him with this wire. That's fine. He'll hang out here. Got to pay the cat tax.
That's true.
Here's the process. Okay. And now he's gone. So inside the actual state machine of the logger, remember from Splashy, everything's event driven. So when you get a new message, it comes in through this new message event. So we just write it into the SMO data as our message to log, and then we call new message. And then from that message, or from here, we decide, if the log file exists or not. We'll either open one or not do anything. And then we're going to do all of this stuff. Um, so the logger knows when there are messages pending, and that's helpful for when you're trying to shut down your application. You can wait until all messages have been logged. Since this is asynchronous, you don't really know for sure when the messages have actually made it out to the text file. So if you want to make sure that all of your messages are written to the file before you shut down, there's a little helper function that I built into the logger that just checks to see if there are any messages pending. So we add the message to the log file, and then we update the UI, which is this right here. This is limited to only 100 entries, and it'll cycle through and only show the 100 most recent. I didn't want this UI to continue taking up more and more memory if your
Makes
application was going
sense.
to run for hours. So let's look through all these. Update message pending. This isn't very exciting. That's not exciting. Add it to the log file. We do that here. And the log file model is just, so here's the 100 entries that we're showing on the UI. So each time we add one, we just rotate our array by one element. So
Okay.
that's how that's working.
Hey, what's that state navigator you used? Is that built into LabVIEW?
That's the State Machine Explorer. I think that's a
Okay.
separate package. It might also just come with the SMO package. I'm not sure, but you
Oh,
can definitely get it separate. It's
interesting.
incredibly handy for navigating state machines.
Yeah,
This is the main
that is
Explorer.
actually that's one of the main things I really don't like about like while loop case structure state machines is that
Oh,
it becomes very difficult to navigate through the states.
right. Even
So
this
this
one that's got
navigator
like
looks
30
interesting.
states in it or something like that. Like if I were to
Yeah.
try to do this on my own, I would, ugh, no fun.
Yeah. Like in
But the tools
general, I
make it
really
easy.
don't like a case structure that's more than like 15 states.
Yeah, I get that.
But
That's
this looks useful.
It is, yeah, especially because you can collapse certain things. The one downside about this is, and I don't know if anyone cares, your code complexity starts rising really quickly if you start adding a lot of states and start doing a lot of logic inside your SMO.
That's one of my main objections to this any kind of like while loop case structure
Yeah,
state machine.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I get that. I get that. One of my VIs recently, I think it was just a regular state machine. My complexity got up to like 7.5 or something, and I'm like, okay, I need to do some refactoring.
I've seen much more complicated VIs. I think the most complicated one I've seen is like a 19. Maybe Nick and Chad can check for me right now
Jeez, I
how
thought it only
complex
went
that
up to
VI is.
10.
It goes higher than 10.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, that's crazy. Um, all right. What do we do? What do we actually write to the log file? Or how do we write a message? Let's look at that. Let's come back to our event structure, come to the macro, new message. Oh, here we go. So the first thing we do, we update the UI, and then we do all of the logic to write it into the file.
Gregory asked, what does a -2 into a list box do?
So -2 will make sure that's nothing is selected. -1, I think, selects the header row.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. List boxes are unfortunately like the best UI component and the worst at the same time.
Yeah.
Like using list
I like
boxes
tree
is,
controls.
ugh. Have you used, oh, you need to start using the tree map API. I should show you that later.
Oh, yeah, we'll do that later.
Um, okay, so we take the log file model. Um, what's this? Right. If right doesn't have any parameters, why would right have a parameter? That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe this is some old code. So we take the log file model and we read the most recent log file entry. This is also probably calling toString here. Um, log file entry. Oh, that's already been turned into a string. When do we call toString? Oh, when we add it to the model. Okay. So we take, oh yeah, I was looking at this code and we got distracted with a question. So you take whatever message was passed into the SMO, you read the time on it. If a time wasn't given, then you timestamp it when the logger receives it. Otherwise, messages are timestamped on creation rather than when they're actually written to the file. This is helpful because, again, it's asynchronous and we log down to the millisecond. So this can actually be used for some performance testing on a more millisecond to second scale rather than, sub-millisecond. And then here's where we call toString. So depending on which implementation of the message you're using, we'll either just read whatever text you wrote, which is what we did in the main VI when we wrote the current state. Or for example, if you were to use the error message, we'll take whatever the error that was in the message and we'll append this text to it. So we're just using dynamic dispatch here, depending on what type of message you've got, and writing it to our file.
Gregory asked, do we get recertification points for attending this virtual user group? And the answer to that is I have no idea, because I don't really understand how the recertified by points program works, and sometimes they don't answer my emails. I guess we'll find out.
Helpful answer. Thanks, Mike.
I'll try to look into that. Okay, I'll try to look into that, and I'll post something to the forums when I find out.
There's a whole bunch of other things you can do with this logger. I'm not going to show them because they don't really focus on SMO. One of the things that maybe there is. There's one thing about SMO that I really like that I stretched in this state machine. Let me actually open the SMO or the logger project. So I don't know how many of you write unit tests. The right answer should be all of you, but the answer that I would expect would be maybe like a quarter or less. We use VI Tester. It's another JKI tool. Within it, I wrote some tests to make sure all these conditions work. For example, testing for an error message. If you don't have an error, it doesn't create a logger. If you do have an error, it makes a logger, and it makes sure that the log file exists, etc. Things like this. The cool test that I wanted to show was the number of loggers running simultaneously. So here you can see that I'm going to create 12 loggers just by running this obtain logger in a for loop. None of them are going to be named, but I'm going to end up with 12 loggers running in the background that can all write to whatever log files they want. So if you have an application that, maybe you want UI logs and database logs and I don't know, whatever the cool kids are using these days, you can log it. You can have a separate logger, you put it in a separate file, and you can get sort of some separation that way. So this was a neat feature of SMO that I think I've only used in unit tests. I've never actually used this in an application. For my purposes, having one log file has actually been really helpful because you can see the sequence of events of your whole application. But let's actually just run this and we'll see that hopefully it should pass. Man, running unit tests live, that is risky. So in this case, I made 12 loggers, named each of them. They all got named the months of the year just so they were unique, and it passed. So cool. 12 loggers were able to run at once. And that's really similar to Actor too, right? Like if you make one Actor, you can spin up however many copies of it you want. SMO has that same functionality.
Yeah, earlier Tom asked, what are the pros and benefits of SMO? And pros and cons of SMO versus the pros and cons of Actors. So
yeah,
maybe we can
let's
spend
get
a
into
little time talking about that.
Yeah, because we're already at 45 minutes, and the next SMO I have is like the biggest one, and I don't really think that we'll get much more value talking about that one. So maybe let's get into some benefits.
Sure.
One thing, actually, not yet. One thing I did promise people is that we'd be looking at some design patterns in UML. So I just want to show that really quick.
Oh yeah, this is cool.
So for those who do a lot of object-oriented design, this is actually a design I'm currently working on, so I don't want to show that. For those who do a lot of
Too late, it's on the internet forever.
Yeah, you're right. Documentation, manifest UML. Okay, so here is a UML diagram for the project we're looking at. I won't actually show any code because we've already seen a lot of SMO code, and you've seen one state machine, you've seen them all. But I'll say that I have another SMO that I've called a manifest manager. It has a messaging scheme that's actually borrowed from Actor because I was trying to answer that question myself maybe a month and a half ago, and that's kind of where the inspiration for this whole presentation came from, looking at the pros and cons of SMO versus Actor. And so I thought an interesting way to figure that out would be to pretend that my SMO is an Actor and make a messaging scheme that has a do function that gets called anytime you send one of these messages. It sounds an awful lot like Actor. Doing this, I found out that What did I find out? I like this. I like the idea of messages. If I put them all into one library, I can make all of my messages private, and I can expose the creation and sending of those messages through functions within the actual SMO itself.
Mhm.
So I have this community scoped function called add item, and my add item to manifest message has a do function that calls the add item function, right? So now all of
Mhm.
my messaging scheme is hidden from the client. They don't have to worry about messages. Um, they can just use these public functions here: request, add item to manifest. This handles the creation and sending, and all the other stuff of the messaging structure. It's all built into this one public function. So um, yeah, I thought this was this part of it, the messaging, and I call them requests, but a message or request is the same thing almost. Um, I thought it was a really good design. I really like it. It does help to separate it. It forces you to make a really good API, because if your actor or your SMO doesn't have a good API, your messages aren't going to be very useful because there's not really any
Yeah.
functions for them to call. So I think whether using SMO or actor, having a good messaging system enforces the development of a good API.
Somewhat. I think it's very easy to have what I would think of as
Or you just
message
make everything
sprawl.
public.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah. Doesn't
um,
necessarily fix that problem.
right. A big benefit of SMO, which we found when trying to integrate an actor into our code that was not actor based. So we have some project, some code that exists already, doesn't have any actors in it. We wanted to add an actor to it. Um, that would be fine if we didn't also have to get data out of that actor.
Right.
Getting data out of an actor is very difficult if everything else you're doing is not actor.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, well
Actor
that's good.
framework actor framework kind of has a way of like if you decide to go actors, then it kind of like spreads like a virus, and then
You've got
your
to go
entire
full
project
actor.
kind of yeah, basically. And
Yeah.
that's I'm fully on that. Yeah, I'm 100% actor, so
Yeah.
that's the direction I went.
Um, right. I think that's probably fine if you're the only one working on your project. But if you're at a company where there's a lot of turnover, or if you're working with a bunch of other LabVIEW developers of various experience, um, I think the JKI State Machine is more approachable than just about anything you can do with an actor. Because even if you tell someone, okay, it's like here's the code that I want you to work on, like it's only in this one VI, it's still really helpful if you can explain the entire architecture and for them to understand it.
So I would say that I think the role of an architect is to provide a structure, and if you can provide a good structure with SMOs or actor framework,
Hmm.
and I remember at my last job, I had someone who had zero object-oriented experience, but I was still able to explain kind of the basics of you would override this if you wanted to do this. If
Hmm.
you set up a good structure like a factory pattern or something inside, then I think they can have an okay time of working it out.
An okay
Um,
time. What an endorsement.
I mean, I think it's always tricky if you're working with someone who doesn't have any object-oriented experience.
Agreed.
You kind of have
Agreed.
to like at least show them the mechanics, right? Like
Right.
this is what an override means. So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I think that's probably universal to SMOs or actors.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah. And I think that's
so
actually
in
where
the
like this
chat,
UML tool comes in handy, because you can like visually show someone's like, okay, this inherits from that, and talking about like this subclass traveling on this parent wire. Um, I think it's pretty helpful to look at diagrams like these and kind of see how they all relate to each other.
so in the chat, people are talking about how you get data out of SMOs. Francois says public events. Casey says you can use data to get it out via user event, just like SMOs within active framework. I would say that's true. Um, like you can use anything to publish out of an actor. You can use a queue, you can use a user event, whatever you want. It's not built into the framework, so I'm
Hmm.
not sure how built into SMOs the publishing data out is. And I guess if is the basic underlying structure like user events. So
Yeah, it is.
SMOs
Yeah.
naturally
So
use user events. So
right. So when I showed off the splash screen, that doesn't have any events that come out of it. I guess the logger doesn't really have any events that come out of it either. So I didn't have a good example of an SMO producing data, but it does so via the public events. So in this case here, I have a message called read one item from manifest, and a um, it returns a manifest item. So let me actually show you what that code is.
okay. While you're pulling that up, Francois says you can have a public API method that gets data straight from the DVR. No message sent to actor core required. And
Ew.
I kind of think that's a very bad idea.
Who's doing that? I
Or
don't want him on my team.
that's well, I think
I
a
mean, there's
big
there's a
benefit.
time and place. There's a time and place.
Yeah, I think a big benefit of actors and that's like actors as a concept, not just the actor framework.
Hmm.
Actually, just the benefit of objects and encapsulation is that some data is private and not allowed external access by anyone except within that class. And I
Hmm.
think breaking that encapsulation, if you're going to do it, you should be very, very careful and
Hmm.
be doing it for very, very good reasons. I'm
Yeah,
not,
and write
I
comments.
yeah, I would not recommend it as like a public API access to that private data.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I'm on the same page. Okay,
yeah.
so here's the VI that I was showing or talking about on my UML diagram. This is going to request read one item from the manifest. So it's going to create that message and it's going to ask you what's the ID of the manifest item that you want to read. It's going to send this request into my SMO via this user event. And then it's going to wait here reading. Okay, so this is a private event. So here's an example where I'm using a private event that I only want my API to have access to, and that's why it's private. So it's really just nomenclature. There's not really anything stopping you from calling this read private event in another function and exposing it to the user, but just don't do that. The idea was I wanted to have my API responses in the private events, so that's what this is doing. So I register for the private event, and if I get a response, I'll pass it out as a variant, and then whatever API function is calling this await response will know what data to convert that variant into. And
Mhm.
the manifest manager will also return any user errors that happened. So in the manifest manager, I have an isolation between framework errors and user errors. And that's pretty handy because let's say like you requested an item and it doesn't exist. I don't want that to take down the whole actor or the whole SMO. I just want to return that error to a user. And that's what this error here would be.
Gregory asked, "Are you guaranteed to register for the response event before it gets fired?"
Even if you don't, will that cause me to lose data? This is a real question because this code may or may not be in production.
Okay, Francois says that what he means is that you just kind of copy the data out of the DVR. Nothing
Yeah.
writes to the DVR. Um,
Yeah. Still, if you're going to have something that's an actor that's running asynchronously, my thought is that it should be fully encapsulated. And reading from the DVR directly breaks that encapsulation. And it causes you to, like, why not just have a message, right? Like, why not just have the
that extra
actor
step,
fully in
that extra
control of
layer.
its own data?
Mhm.
Like in this case, if I wanted to get data out of my manifest manager, it could just deny the request.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think exposing the reference directly is what's making me feel a little uncomfortable. I mean, it's not direct because you're kind of copying it out of the DVR, but
Hmm. Still,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
it's like a
I'm sure.
backdoor.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably a place for it, but it would not be my instinct to go that route.
Right, yeah. If I saw someone doing that, I would ask them why they're doing that, like if they didn't have a comment on it. So here's an
Right.
example. I made an SMO that extended the UI embeddable, and I didn't give it a UI, so just don't ever show it. Um,
Mhm.
If I wanted to add like a UI here to show what items were currently being managed, I could do that as like a helper thing, sort of like we saw with the logger. Um, but I just haven't done that. So this is just like the default UI that comes with it. So
Yeah.
here's where I'm doing like the for people familiar with Actor, this is going to look like your Actor core right here. So these are all of your
Mhm.
messages. This is the do function, and any error that comes out of it, I store in this response cluster, response data, response error, and then I just send it back to the API. I take the response and the response user event, and I take my response, send it in, and then clear the response out of the SMO.
Right.
So here's all the overrides for the different functions that the manifest manager can do. So doing it
Hmm.
this way, I found out that the SMO framework itself doesn't do
Hmm.
anything. This could have easily been an actor. All of these functions here aren't really doing anything. These are all template and framework um, frames that we're looking at here. All of the magic happens in this one, do override.
Okay.
So in
So
this
you
case, it
you
probably should have
potentially
been an
have
actor.
like a runtime error here if you're not casting the variant right when you
If I'm not what?
if you don't process the variant right on the
That
other
happens at
end.
the API.
Okay.
So that variant should never be exposed to the user. If you look in the public API, all of these functions that await on the response,
Hmm.
um, they would take this variant and cast it into the right type themselves. So in this one here, request read one item from manifest. Well, I make sure the API is requesting to read one item, so it's going to convert it into one item.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we're like almost at an hour. So I guess one will open up the questions. Does that sound good, Nate?
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
All
I'm done
right. And
talking.
then say what are as we wait for questions to like queue up, what are your thoughts of pros and cons overall of SMO?
So SMO, I think pros, if you're familiar with the JKI State Machine, um, it's a pretty easy learning curve to get into SMO. The base SMO class has all the functions you need for managing the life cycle of the SMO, create, start, stop. Um, and it's really easy to start doing things asynchronously and to start thinking about really doing a lot of powerful like multi-threaded applications.
Hmm.
I think it for some may be a good like gateway into Actor
Yeah.
because it is. I'm going to get into the cons now. It is kind of a heavy framework. There's a lot of VIs that come with it. When you make them from the template, there's a lot of template code. It's hard to know what you do and don't need to keep. Um,
Hmm.
and so you could end up with a lot of extra bloat in your classes. Um, and
But if you're comparing to actors, there's no way the bloat and overhead compares.
um, it's different, right? So when I think of actor, I think of like many classes with few VIs. SMO is the opposite. You have few classes with many VIs. So within my this right here is one single state machine object. I've got all these folders with all these VIs. You've got to manage the scope differently. Like if you had an actor with this many functions in it, you're probably not doing actor correctly, right?
That is a lot. Yeah, that's actually more than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Um,
So, and this is because I implemented that messaging structure. So I've got my private data wrapped around a
so
private
this is
API.
this isn't a fair example because you've kind of like bastardized an SMO into an actor, right? So, but would
um,
a typical SMO have like approximately that many methods?
a typical SMO. Let's see. Maybe let's look at
Like
this
an
one. This one's pretty interesting.
yeah. Okay.
Probably not. Probably wouldn't.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Casey asked, with SMOs, is
oh,
encouraged by the framework or otherwise to separate GUIs from business logic?
it's not. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, that's another thing. With SMO, I mean, think about the answer the same question as if it were just a JKI state machine in a single VI.
Mhm.
Um, you wouldn't separate your business logic from your GUI because the state machine is there to kind of pair the two. I
Yeah.
think if you think about it like in a traditional MVC model view controller framework where you've got
Hmm.
the model holding your data, the controller managing access to it, and the view displaying the data, a JKI state machine inside of a single VI kind of is the controller where the front panel is the view and the model is maintained in state data. So it's all very close.
Mm.
That's not
I
to say you
mean,
can't separate
yeah.
it.
I like to an extent, I feel like LabVIEW does not really separate GUIs and business
No,
logic by default,
yeah,
right? Like,
right. And JKI State Machine embraces that. I'll put it that way.
right. Um, Someone's
So
asking
here,
what the copyright is like, and is it BSD? And Francois says it's BSD clause 3.
okay, I was gonna say they put the copyright on every single template, so you wouldn't be hard for me to. Here we go. See, I found it.
Sam asks, you fire the event and then register for the response. What if the response occurs before you register? And I assume you would just miss it.
I don't think you would. I think when you
But it,
create a user event, and if you put data on it, it gets stored in the
yeah.
event queue, and then when you register for it, it'll just dequeue it. I'd be curious if
Have you?
someone would test that.
Does anyone know for sure? Has anyone tried it? I'm asking the chat. And then Christopher Farmer asks, which application types are better suited to SMO and which types are better suited to active framework? I think that entirely depends on the architect you're talking to. I think you'll get totally different answers.
Yeah.
Francois says you have to register first. That makes sense.
Mm,
Yeah, it makes sense to me that you missed the data. And
I
several people are saying that. Like there's like Casey, Matt, Omar. Yeah. The queue doesn't
okay.
exist until you register. Okay.
Is that true?
Yeah. There's enough CLAs saying that's true to make me think it's true. Like I
Okay.
recognize at least 2 CLAs in the chat saying that it's true. So um, are you testing it right now? You okay.
Yeah, why not?
uh, yeah, fair enough. I'm not doing anything else. Um, like I love active framework, so I tend to use it very first thing. I think if you ask Casey May in chat, he would probably say the same thing. Like actor is kind of the default toolkit that we reach for.
Hmm.
And I think if you ask Nate, then he would say that SMO is what he reaches for. I don't think
Yeah.
either is better suited or worse suited for any particular application.
I think they try to solve the same problem from different
They
angles.
are, yeah, very much overlapping problem sets. So I guess Tom's question earlier was pros and cons of both SMOs and active framework. And as the person who uses actors a lot more,
Aha, there we
I
go.
can I
Everyone's
I
right.
can list yeah I can list a lot of cons for active framework. I use it all the time, and I love it and hate it, which is my same relationship with LabVIEW, right? So yeah, I think there's a steep learning curve. Um, there is not at the moment like JKI state machine objects. They kind of have this track where if you're familiar with state machines and then you kind of know JKI state machines, then when you move into SMOs, it looks kind of similar. There's nothing
Hmm.
like that for active framework. It's basically they just toss you into the ocean and hope that you're able to swim. Um, there's significant overhead. The compiler does not like it when you have lots of classes, and
What's
it
the
does not
overhead
like
in
it when you have a
actor?
lot of PIs. Overhead with actors, every time you create a message, you need a whole class.
Right.
And I think even Stephen Mercer, Aristus Q, admits that this is like, it shouldn't necessarily be that way. He kind of got
Hmm.
shoehorned into making it that way because of G as a programming language. This was the easiest way to create actor framework with the existing structures.
Hmm.
And so there's just a ton of classes. And Casey says the cons are more related to the IDE's handling of many classes rather than the architecture itself. Yes, I agree with like 80% of that, but
Mm,
having to create so many classes, even if the IDE made it super easy, I kind of think that's not the best. Matt asks, is the overhead during runtime or just the IDE? I would say it's like 95% in IDE problem. It's a problem with like
yeah.
editing and builds, which
Right.
thanks to Casey and I complaining a lot at NI about it, 2020 has significant improvements
Oh,
to the
that's good.
build, to the application builder. So I sent them a project that took 4 hours to build,
Hmm.
um, and they reduced it to like 25 minutes or something.
Oh gosh.
So,
Cool.
uh, and I
Sweet.
don't think, like obviously I'm biased. I don't think I had architecturally like made bad decisions as I was creating that project.
Uh-huh.
Um, all my VIs were very simple and small. Like
Right.
if you open any one of my VIs, they're extremely simple. And
Yeah.
Nick, for all the suffering that he's going through, having inherited that project, I think he would admit that my block diagrams are quite simple. Like if you open any
Yeah.
one file
Right.
in that project, it's so
Yeah.
like they're incredibly small.
Yeah. I mean, I don't
But
necessarily think that's a good goal to go for, which is why I think I like SMO a little bit better because with Actor you do end up with smaller VIs, sure, but like what good is a small VI if you don't know what the code's doing? Or if you have to jump through 6 layers of abstraction before you figure out like what's really happening. And earlier today, we've been looking at your MVC library that you left us. And if you want to talk about layers of abstraction, it's kind of difficult to trace all the messages through and figure out what exactly is happening in that
yeah,
project.
it's kind of like where do you want your complication? Do you want your complication on the block diagram or do you want it in the
Yeah.
project window? And
Yeah, right.
I've kind of tilted toward being like, I like it in the project window because that's kind of like the higher level like architecture. That's kind of where you
Hmm.
put the higher level architecture. So
Yeah.
I kind of like it that way.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and Casey agrees. Like in AF, the complication moves from block diagram in the project. I prefer that.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a journey for me to go for like because there is definitely a philosophy where like if you can't see it on a block diagram, it's very hard to follow.
Hmm.
And LabVIEW is very much a by value data flow kind of program, like
Hmm.
programming language.
Yep.
So not being able to see it, it becomes difficult to figure it out. Um, I would say as you develop Active Framework more, you kind of your brain kind of gets rewired, and then you kind of understand it more. In the same way that going from text based to graphical,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
brain gets rewired. And so I'm very comfortable navigating the project window and figuring out the hooks of classes that are going in and out.
Hmm.
Um, and I've kind of stopped thinking of how a class, like, how do I explain it? Like, when I develop an actor now, I know the ins and outs. So I know what's plugging in, what's plugging out. And it's so encapsulated that you can open that class on its own and make those edits. And it's clear in my mind what's going on.
Yeah.
But I will admit that it is a very big jump. It's a very big leap from someone who's used to having it on the block diagram to having to abstract it into the project window.
I think as long as you make some kind of a UML diagram or a class diagram that shows how all this is related, then
Mm.
that's probably okay. So let that be your lesson. Download
Yeah.
the, what is it? Is it the Goop development, GDS? And start making UML diagrams, start writing unit tests. You'll be a lot happier.
Casey says it's especially helpful for traceability and source control because you can see what's changed in more granular
Yeah,
detail.
yeah, source control, definitely. I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. Nick is like, please document something. And I'll be like, well, um, yeah, I think in that project that Nick is talking about, the documentation is not the best, and that was definitely a time crunch issue, which I'm sure he's also experiencing as well. Um,
Right. How about the project you left me? Was that a time crunch issue too?
that was just I was just bad at programming back then. It's a bad coder. Hmm.
um, do we have any more questions? I think it might be time to wrap up.
Yeah, that's right. Additionally, like we're probably going to host another one of these next month. So if anyone has topics they want to present or topics they'd be interested in hearing about, please let us know. If you have suggestions for the format, we just chose YouTube because it was a platform that everyone could access without having to download another application. If you have either content or format suggestions, we're very open. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up. Thanks for all the questions. Hope you learned a couple things about it. You can find me on LinkedIn if you need to message me if you have any more questions, or I probably can't release the source code due to my company's NDA. I probably can't even show you any of this, but here we are. Weird times, right? Um, but if you do have any general SMO questions, you can send them my way, or you can talk to the kind folks at JKI. They've been really helpful answering my questions along the way.
Yeah. So thanks everyone again for showing up. Definitely like reach out to Nate on LinkedIn, reach out to me on LinkedIn or through the San Diego user group or on Reddit if you want. CLA Mike Lay on Reddit on the R LabVIEW subreddit. We'll definitely announce everything there. And Casey suggests that next time we can do a panel maybe. And Casey, if you want to hop on for a panel, I think you'd be a great asset in that respect. So yeah, Tom asked for a recording, and YouTube will automatically record this. So this same link, once the broadcast is over, will just be a recording of the past hour.
All right. Well, bye everybody.